Welcome to this short presentation on the Gavotta and two variations from Stravinsky's Pulcinella suite. We're going to have a listen to it first of all, just be aware of the repeat signs at the end of the first section. So as you know already, the music for Stravinsky's Pulcinella suite wasn't actually written originally by Stravinsky, but was a reworking of Baroque and classical pieces in a neoclassical style. And you will remember that Stravinsky originally thought the pieces were by a Baroque composer called Pergolesi, but in actual reality they turned out to be by a variety of different Baroque composers. The music for the Gavotta and the two variations is taken from the Harpsichord Suite No. 3 by Carlo Monza. You should know at this stage already that a lot of Baroque instrumental music and orchestral music were dances grouped together in suites that would have been used for dancing. You would also need to be aware of what a gavotte actually is. So if we take a quick look at this Wikipedia page, you will be able to find out that a gavotte was originally a type of French folk dance with 4 beats in a bar and of a moderate tempo, and that ties in nicely with what we've heard from the gavotte from the Pulcinella suite already. One of the regular features of the gavotte which we don't have in our example is the fact that it usually starts halfway through a bar, or the phrases usually start halfway through a bar, as you can see there. So we don't have that in our gavotte, but that is what a typical gavotte is. And if you want more information on that, you can look that up on Wikipedia. One of the first things which you might notice is that we have no stringed instruments in this gavotte. In the opening sinfonia, we had actually 2 sets of stringed instrument, a solo string quartet, as well as a ripiano orchestra of stringed instruments. But this gavotte and the two variations are composed entirely for wind instruments as well as horns. You can't really see because the score has been cut off by the photocopier, but here we have 2 oboes, and we also have a pair of bassoons. We have 1 horn here, but if we look down at the next system, we can see the full orchestration. So 2 flutes at the top of the score, followed by a pair of oboes, followed by a pair of bassoons, and finally a horn. So that is really what the instruments are scored for. Like I've said, the original piece was written for a harpsichord. So if you just look at this opening texture, you can see quite clearly that this would have been the melody that the right hand would have played, what the first oboe has. And this bass line, which the second bassoon has, would have been the original left hand part of the harpsichord. And you can see that there is a lot of movement there in the bass part to keep it interesting. As you know, one of the main features of neoclassicism is writing for instruments that wouldn't have had a very good capability in the Baroque or classical eras. And as you can see from the bassoon part, there are a lot of large leaps between the different notes. And even if you look at the first bassoon part, you can see that at the very beginning it's very high pitched, which would have been unusual in the Baroque era. And the same can be said for the French horn at this stage. Now, in terms of the musical features of the piece, first of all, you should look at the key signature here, which is two sharps, F sharp and C sharp, so we are in D major. The opening melody is very elegant and typical of the Baroque era in that it has balanced 4-bar phrases, as you can see here. And if you look at the second beat in the main part of the melody, you'll be able to see that this is really an example of a turn. It's just been notated fully instead of using a turn symbol. So the first phrase is simply 4 bars long, as we've said, and ends with a perfect cadence in D major. Nothing really unusual. In fact, at first glance you would wonder if this piece had been composed in the 20th century at all, but as we said, it's really the orchestration which gives that away. The second phrase, however, is a bit longer than 4 bars. It starts here and carries on right through until the end of that first section. So it's really 6 bars long and it's been extended. That isn't Stravinsky's work, it's already part of the original, it's just an extended phrase. As you might expect as well, there are some modulations in this piece which were originally part of the harpsichord suite, and you might be able to see here that we start to see some accidentals. Can you work out what the modulation might be first of all? So we have the addition of G sharps and we were originally in D major. I'll give you a minute to try and figure that out. Okay, if you haven't already figured it out, I'm going to tell you. So if you want to do it yourself without the answer, just stop the presentation for a minute. But the addition of G sharps and this chord on the last bar here of this section should tell you that we have moved to A major, which is the dominant. So we'll just listen to that opening A section again, just to point out again that the main melody is played by the oboe. That would originally have been the right hand of the harpsichord piece, and the left hand part of the harpsichord piece is played by bassoon 2. Looking at the B section now, starting at figure 74, we can see that the main melody has now moved to the flute. There are some examples of sequences. So if you look at this little pattern of notes here, that is then repeated. But if you look further into the melody, we can see then that this is an example of a rising sequence. We also have some musical terms which you will need to know the meaning of here. Dolce, meaning sweet, or dolcissimo, meaning very sweetly. Have a little look at what the horn is playing as well. This is kind of a sighing idea, and you'll be able to hear that more clearly when you listen to the recording. But it's kind of a repeated idea in the French horn that really you would be more likely to find in something like the Romantic era. Now this is really, again, part of the original, so not a new idea in terms of Stravinsky's work, but again it's quite unusual that this has been given to the French horn part. This is another feature of neoclassicism. As we look on further into the B section, you'll be able to see that what the horn originally had for the first few bars is being passed to the bassoon. Now the difference is, if we look a little bit closer, you might just be able to see that the bassoon has a little slanty line in between these two notes. In other words, a glissando. That definitely would have not been found in the original or any bassoon music of the Baroque era. However, in the 20th century, because we are working with neoclassicism, you will start to see some 20th century features. Just looking over the page then at the last two bars of this phrase, you will also see some examples of accenting passing notes. This bar should be outlining the chord of A. I know it might not look like it, but remember that the horn is a transposing instrument. We have to put these notes down a fifth to figure out what they actually are. So this bar should be really an A, E, C sharp and A. So it's really outlining the chord of an A. But in the upper parts you have notes which are clashing against that. For example, in the first oboe you have a D against that. So that's one example of an accented passing note. At figure 75 then we have the start of a descending sequence. So you can see that this melody is the same as these two bars, and obviously the same as these two bars in a descending sequential pattern. Looking at the harmony in and around these couple of bars, at bars 19 and 20, we can see the key in and around here is moving through F sharp minor with the additions of E sharps. And then in the next two bars we have E minor, and then finally the last two bars, it's a wee bit difficult to see this because the score has been cut off, but if you look at your own you'll also be able to see that it's really D major. So descending melodic and harmonic sequence there. So just to go over that again, F sharp minor, E minor and D major. The orchestration is also a little bit interesting here. We have basically the majority of the instruments in and playing homophonically, mostly the same rhythms. But what is interesting is the orchestration. So we still have the pair of flutes, pair of oboes, pair of bassoons, pair of horns, and in addition now we have a trumpet as well as a trombone. Now they are only really used to reinforce cadences. You will notice that they're not really part of the overall texture until the cadences happen here. But that is really the full wind section in at this point for these 6 bars. Looking ahead then, we have some interesting orchestration again at figure 76. You will notice again that we have just bassoons and horns. This is looking a little bit similar to the Sinfonia in terms of orchestration. But again, the pitch is very high in this first bassoon. It is really something that a Baroque bassoon would not have been able to play, as well as the horn 1 part here. Remember, this is the treble clef, so this is very high for a horn. Again, there are more examples of ornamentation which have been written out fully instead of using symbols to be notated. In terms of the harmony, we can see that D major is about to be re-established. We are in and around a chord of A, roughly here. You can see some G sharps and this chord of A, and as you might figure out, that is acting as chord 5 for the return of D major here. So, just in terms of the orchestration, in this section we have gone from full orchestra down to slightly less forces with just the bassoons and horns. And interestingly now, we have returned to just 2-part writing and what would have been the original bass line and the original melody in the flute and bassoon 1.